Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of True Scary Stories. First up we have Watcher on the Ridge by Mix Mothman Esquire. All of these details are remembered from when I was a child receiving second-hand information, so please take all details with a grain of salt. When I was a child, my mother owned a campsite property in the jungles of Belize that traveling backpackers would frequent to visit the caves and jungles of the area. It was a beautiful remote spot in a valley surrounded by only a small Mennonite community and some local villagers a few miles away. There weren't many roads, most of which were dirt, and it was hard to traverse through the thick mountainous wilderness if you weren't taking the main road in and out of the valley. All of this is to say, it was extremely remote and hard to reach, so random strangers passing through was not the norm, unless they were explicitly there to visit the campsite. There were around 6 other homes in the valley that were reachable by foot. 5 of them were inhabited by the peaceful local Mennonite community, but one was owned by an American woman who had a reputation for being a cruel, vitriolic problem starter. There was even a rumor that she lived in Belize because she was wanted by the FBI for murder in America. There were also rumors that she hired local men to steal and vandalize other properties for her. We'll call her Carrie. One example I remember of her behavior was an interaction I had with her when I was around 10. My brothers and I were friends with the property owner's kids, so we would all float down the creek in tubes and walk back up the road to the property. We all felt safe doing this, as there were usually at least 4 of us together at a time. Carrie would often run down to her fence line when she heard us coming and scream at us the entire time we walked past, no matter how loud or quiet we were being. She threatened to let her 3 large dogs out to attack us, and one time she chased us down the street with a gun. That was the last time we were allowed to walk back up the street without an adult. One afternoon, a female friend and I were playing in the swimming area of the creek in front of the main building of my mother's property. We were around age 14 at the time. There was a huge rock that jutted up out of the water on the far side of the creek, and just above that, the mountainside rose up at a sheer 90-degree angle, bulging out in some areas. It formed a sort of rounded jungle cliff that was impossible to climb up or down from, making the swimming hole and main campsite building feel closed off and peaceful. As we stood on our side of the creek bank splashing in the water, I looked up and caught a glimpse of movement atop the rocky cliff. There, crouched in some bushes with a black bandana tied around his face, was a man in dark clothing watching us play in the water. I still remember the feeling of ice-cold dread as my heart plunged into my stomach. He was holding a machete, and he had the most hateful look in his eyes that I have ever seen. In my young mind, I immediately knew he was up to something bad. It wouldn't have been easy to get to the spot he was now crouching in without being seen if he came from our side. So he likely had hiked from the other side of the hilltop. If that were the case, he must have been surprised to have found the cliff there with no way down. For several long moments, the man and I stared at each other until my friend grabbed my wrist. We sprinted together back up the stairs into the building where our parents were. My mother and her parents immediately came out yelling bloody murder at the man, shouting at him to leave and never return or he would regret it. But by the time we actually got back to the creekside, the man was gone. Later that week, some of the adults managed to find a way to the spot he'd been seen and found a discarded water bottle, suggesting he'd been there for some time. From then on, we were extra careful where we went alone in Belize. Years later, after my mother had sold the property and we stopped visiting, we heard news from that area that someone had been found deceased in the orange grove on my mother's property. The death was tied back to Carrie, but she was never arrested due to local police corruption, it all happening so remotely, and the fact that she hired someone and didn't do it herself. My mother is convinced to this day that Carrie hired the man in the bushes. To what end, we don't know, but the way he was staring at me and my friend makes my brain go to dark places. And we wouldn't have been the only little girls to have gone missing in the valley. So Carrie and any of your associates, let's not meet. Story number 2. A stranger blended into our party for hours, by Court Foam. I live in a college city that is also near a lot of amusement parks and tourist areas. The city is on the outskirts of entire gated communities filled with huge vacation rentals. Some of these houses are basically mansions with pools, game rooms, theaters, and more bedrooms than anybody would realistically need. A couple of months ago, one of my friends rented one of those villas for the weekend and threw an end-of-semester party. It wasn't an open party posted online or anything like that. She invited her friends and some of her cousins around our age, and everyone was allowed to bring a few people. I went with my boyfriend. At the busiest point, there were probably 30 to 40 people spread throughout the house. Some people were outside by the pool, some were drinking in the kitchen, and other people were in the game room. There was also a theater upstairs that kept people going in and out of. A smaller group of us planned on spending the night, so people had overnight bags, purses, chargers, and blankets lying around. Most people were still planning to leave later. I first noticed this guy maybe an hour or two into the party. He looked around our age, probably early 20s. There was nothing about him that immediately stood out. He was dressed normally, talking to people, and acting completely comfortable. I assumed he came with one of my friend's cousins because I had never met all their friends. I remember seeing him talking to my boyfriend and some other guys near the game room. When I walked over, he joined the conversation like he already knew everybody. He even knew a couple of people's names, so I didn't question it. The first time someone asked me who he was, it was honestly funny. One of my friends pulled me aside and asked me if I knew who he was, and I told her I thought he came with one of our friend's cousins. We were all drinking, so it became a joke for a while. People kept asking each other who invited him, but nobody seemed seriously concerned. Eventually, someone said they remembered seeing him walk through the front door with a group that had gone outside to get drinks and other things from their cars. When somebody finally asked that group, they said they didn't know him either. They remembered him walking inside directly behind them, but they thought he had already been at the party and had just gone outside for a minute. One of them had held the door open for him without thinking about it. At that point, we were all laughing like, "So who the hell is this man?" It was weird, but there were so many people there that we still thought there had to be an explanation. Maybe the person who invited him was outside. Maybe they had already left. Maybe one of the drunk people there had invited somebody and forgotten. He wasn't standing in a corner staring at people or doing anything that screamed danger. He was social, played games with people, and moved around the party like everyone else. At one point I was standing near a conversation where he commented on how big the house was. He said something like, "There's so many rooms, but there's also mad people here. Where is everybody even going to sleep?" It didn't seem like a weird question because people were already talking about who was staying and who was leaving. Someone explained that only a smaller group was spending the night. A few couples had bedrooms, and some people would probably sleep in the theater because it had large reclining seats. The theater was the main reason anybody was going upstairs during the party. People had been watching music videos and hanging out in there throughout the night, so nobody really paid attention to who was going up or coming back down. Later that night, one of my friends got way too drunk. Another friend helped her upstairs and put her in one of the bedrooms so she could sleep it off. That room was also being used by a few people who were staying overnight, so there were bags and other things inside. My friend left the door open because people were going to be going in and out, and so anyone passing by could check on her. A little while later, the same friend who had helped her upstairs went back to make sure she was okay. The bedroom door was almost completely shut. She knew she had left it open, but at first she assumed someone had closed it because of the noise downstairs. When she opened the door, the guy was inside the room alone with our friend. Our friend was still passed out on the bed. Her purse was open near her, and the guy was standing by the nightstand holding her phone. My other friend immediately asked him what he was doing. He said the phone had been ringing and he was trying to figure out who it belonged to. Then he said he had heard someone throwing up earlier and wanted to make sure she was okay. My friend told him he didn't even know her and had no reason to be alone in the bedroom with her, especially with the door basically closed. He kept saying she was misunderstanding the situation, and he was only trying to help. The arguing woke our drunk friend up enough for her to look at him and ask who he was. My other friend started yelling downstairs and asking who brought him and telling whoever he came with that they both needed to leave. People started coming upstairs and gathering in the hallway. At first, everyone expected somebody to step forward and claim him. Literally nobody did. One of my friend's boyfriends is a lot more confrontational than the rest of us. He walked up to the guy and directly asked who he came with. The guy said the people he knew had already left. My friend's boyfriend asked for their names. He gave one name, but nobody knew who he was talking about. Then he said he might have gotten the person's name wrong because they had only recently met. Someone pointed out that earlier he had acted like he knew one of my friend's cousins. He said we had misunderstood him. According to him, he never said he knew them, he only said he had been hanging out with that group during the party. My friend's boyfriend told him nobody there knew him, so he needed to leave. What really bothered me is how calm the guy stayed. He didn't get angry, embarrassed, or nervous. He just shrugged and said something like, "My bad, I thought it was an open party. It's not that serious." Then he walked downstairs and left. For a few seconds, everyone just stood there. He acted so casual that it almost made us feel like we had overreacted. Yeah, that was the point. That's what people like him do. They always act like you're the problem when you have a reasonable reaction to their bullshit. And accidentally kicked out some confused drunk person. He didn't seem confused. Then the friend who had been sleeping checked her purse. Some of her cash was gone. That was when everyone started checking their belongings. Someone couldn't find their car keys. Another girl's wallet was missing. Somebody else couldn't find their AirPods. A group of us started searching the house. When they checked the theater upstairs, someone opened the storage compartment inside one of the reclining seats. There were several things inside that clearly didn't belong together. There were 2 wallets, a set of car keys, AirPods, a watch, loose cash, and a couple of pieces of jewelry. 2 driver's licenses had been removed from the wallets and placed at the bottom of the compartment. Both IDs belonged to girls who were at the party. Everything belonged to different people and had been taken from different places around the house. One person had left her wallet in the kitchen. The car keys had been on a table near the pool door. The AirPods had been inside a jacket in the game room. Nothing technically left the house because he was confronted before he could take it. But someone had gathered all of it and hidden it inside the theater. We couldn't prove that he had moved every single item, but he had just been found alone in a bedroom holding our friend's phone with her purse open beside him. People also started remembering that he had gone upstairs multiple times throughout the night. Nobody thought anything of it, because the theater was up there and people had been coming and going. I know people are probably going to ask why we didn't immediately contact the police. There were a lot of people drinking at the party, including people who should not have been. Everyone was worried the police would show up, treat him like a regular party crasher, and focus more on everything happening at the house. Nobody wanted my friend to get in trouble or lose the rental. In hindsight, we probably still should have called. Since the house was under my friend's name, she contacted the property manager and resort security. The rest of us only know what happened afterward through the update she gave us. The house had a camera facing the front entrance, and the community has security cameras throughout. I should hope so, given the area. The front camera showed the group we remembered coming back from their cars. The guy was walking toward the house alone several feet behind them. Right before they reached the door, he sped up and fell into step with them. When one of the people held the door open, he walked inside without saying anything. The group thought he was already with us. Everyone inside thought he had come with them. Security found more footage of him walking around the community before he entered our villa. They couldn't figure out how he originally got through the gate. He wasn't connected to my friend's reservation. There was no guest pass under his name. From what the property manager told my friend, they checked the nearby villas he had been seen around and contacted the relevant renters or property managers. Nobody recognized him or claimed he was their guest. The property manager was apparently furious with the resort because the community advertised itself as heavily secured. Somehow a random person had gotten through the gate, wandered around the neighborhood, and walked into a rental without being stopped. For a few weeks my friend didn't hear anything else. Then the property manager contacted her again. Security had stopped the same guy inside the resort on another location. I don't know exactly what he was doing that time, but he wasn't staying there and wasn't listed as anybody's approved guest. They checked his identification and connected him to the footage from our party. His name wasn't common, so my friend looked him up. She found a Facebook profile that matched him and then found court records and an older local article. He had previously been convicted of theft. He had also been arrested for breaking into a home in a neighborhood nearby property and taking wallets, electronics, and other belongings. At least he's consistent. I don't know what legally happened after our incident. My friend was told the footage and information were given to law enforcement and that he was permanently banned from the resort. Since nothing actually left the house, I'm not sure whether he was ever actually charged for what happened at our party. I still think about how easily he got inside. He didn't force his way through the gate or break into the house. He just walked behind a group of people and let everyone make assumptions for him. He stayed for hours. He talked to us, learned people's names, and heard that some of us planned on sleeping there. Had my friend not gone back upstairs when she did, I don't know how long he would have stayed or what else he would have done. The scariest part is that if nobody had questioned him, he probably would have spent the night in that house with us. Okie dokie. Third and final story for this video. In the Basement of the Moose Lodge by Lawtechie. I grew up in a small beach resort town. It was remarkable for two things: a large collection of Victoria-era mansions and a tiny year-round population. When the tourists left at the end of the summer, it became a ghost town. Most of the workers and business owners would go somewhere else until early spring. If you stayed, it was because you didn't have options. My family wasn't as well-to-do, so we'd close up most of the hotel and retreat to a few rooms, conserving heat and power until next season. In 1982, our town was barely holding on. In the summer, we pretty much got overflow from the surrounding beach towns with their newer, better-appointed hotels, fancier restaurants, and nicer beaches. There was a national recession, so there weren't as many tourists. Some of those fancy mansions were abandoned or burned down for insurance at the end of the season. I had a small group of friends in junior high school. We were into role-playing games, sci-fi, and fantasy. Teofilo and I were the only members of the group not named Brian or Matt, 2 of each. We'd play D&D when we could until we got kicked out of the hut. We'd play D&D when we could until we got kicked out of that house. When weather permitted, we'd go to the salt marshes or a closed-down industrial site and skirmish with handmade wooden melee weapons. One December evening, we were packing up to leave Brian 2's house when Steve came in the room. Steve was Brian 2's older brother. At the time, we thought he was cool. He had quit school, had a job on a fishing boat and a car. Oh, he's that older brother. He also had a real sword, which he claimed was a war trophy from his grandfather. Steve suggested that we should go with him to explore the closed-up Moose Lodge, a mansion about a mile from their house. All of us had been on the grounds of the property, since there were paths that led to the salt marshes behind the building. Steve seemed really insistent that we should go visit it that Sunday. A few of us agreed. Steve told us a few times that we should come in from the salt marsh side so that nobody would see us. Sunday came around, and it turned out that everybody had something else to do. I was careful to approach the Moose Lodge from the back. To maintain stealth, I hid in some bushes to scope out the situation. Behind the building was an open backyard big enough to park a few cars. There was one, a red Mercedes diesel sedan with 2 occupants. Steve was in the passenger seat and an older man wearing a cap was in the driver's seat. I remember walking out of the bushes. Steve got out of the car and greeted me, putting his finger to his lips to tell me I should be quiet. Steve was very animated, telling me how neat the basement was and how great it would be to play games. I was peering down into the basement when I heard the man get out of the car and walk up behind me without slowing. I remember that sound, the look in the man's eyes, and the sound of Steve chattering. I felt a wave of fear hit me, and I ran. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but I felt it nonetheless. I booked it home and never mentioned it to anyone. I never went back to Brian 2's house. By the next year, Brian 2 had discovered other hobbies. The rest of us stuck together until college, then drifted apart. I have seen the look in that man's eyes again. In law school, I interned with criminal defense lawyers, and some of those cases were for men accused of child molestation. A few of them had that same expression for a fleeting moment. But I saw it just the same. Okay, and that brings us to the end of today's video. Big thanks to everyone who allowed me to use their stories. If you'd like to support the channel, you can sign up for my Patreon page, linked in the description. $1 or more gets you early access to all the videos at once on Monday. There's also a link to my Discord server, my Threads account, and if you need to contact me, that's kingofthecities@gmail.com, also written in the description. That's everything for now, so until next time, thank you very much for watching, and take very good care of yourselves.